and not just the decree of independence of these regions, but to send troops across the border?
I'll go quickly here because, as you said, awaiting the president. But President Zelensky here did come out today and make a statement. And it's interesting. Again, we went from the U.S. and Ukraine being separate to lockstep on the intelligence, now separate again. Zelensky said there will be no war with Russia. He continued to say it will not be an all-out war and there will not be a broad-cut escalation, which is obviously very different from the United States, which, in terms of the rhetoric, still saying they see the possibility of an all-out escalation and conflict. So a little bit of blue water between the two, but you'll see obviously how this goes over the next hours. And certainly what the president has to say right now is going to be very crucial on the sanctions. The Ukrainians want big, serious sanctions. The U.S. government wants to start at a level where they can escalate significantly depending on what Putin does. And a lot of what we've seen so far today has been a lot of window dressing. What the UK did, those oligarchs they sanctioned have been sanctioned by the United States for the past 4 years. They're pretty much on every list. So that's not very much from the UK. They say they're going to escalate it. But again, it really depends what Biden brings to the table when he speaks in any second now.
Clarissa, I share Victor's trepidation in asking you a question because we're watching the podium closely, but tell us what is happening in Kyiv at this hour.
I'd say there's a marked shift, Allison, in the mood and the tone here that we're hearing and feeling. Everybody recognized yesterday's speech from President Putin as a kind of pivotal moment. And whereas before people said, there's no way he's going to invade, after listening to that speech where he basically negated the idea of Ukraine even being a sovereign state, I think people feel very differently. And we've seen protests in solidarity with the government in some parts of the country, in Mariupol, down in the southeast. That's a city that if Putin did decide to push forward forces into the Donbass, and if they did decide to try to go for the original borders that they see as being part of those breakaway republics, could quite frankly, be swallowed up entirely. And so there's a lot of anxiety right now, a lot of questions as to what happens next. President Volodymyr Zelensky, as Aaron said, trying to keep people calm and confident and saying that he doesn't believe there will be an all-out war. He didn't very tellingly use the invasion word, but he did say that he thinks that essentially Russia has created a legal basis, or the fig leaf of a legal basis, to further aggression. And that could be indeed what we might see here as we anticipate. And indeed, as NATO says, we are already seeing Russian troops going into that Donbass area. That front line has already been very tense for the last few days and the last few months. And the worry now is that things will escalate further.
Nick Robertson, we just heard from Aaron discussing the sanctions announced from the UK. We heard from the European Union today, sanctions as well. Is there anything that has surprised the Kremlin potentially on these lists of sanctions ahead of what we're waiting for from President Biden?
If you take every piece of evidence that President Putin is putting forward and has been ramping up his propaganda today, he's not been put off at all by anything that is heard. The former president, former Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev said, welcome to the new world reality, essentially, that this is going to mean the Nord Stream 2 pipeline not going ahead. That's going to mean higher gas prices for Europeans. So what have we heard from President Putin today? Well, he has pulled his diplomats out of Ukraine. That's a concern. He has got the government authorization, rubber stamp, to put his forces inside Ukraine. He has said that the territories that Russia now respects as independent are not just those areas that are held by the separatists themselves, but are actually much larger areas, some parts of which are held by Ukrainian authorities. He's ramped up his propaganda without basis, saying that Ukraine is preparing a nuclear weapon threat against Russia that he says is a strategic threat to Moscow. The rhetoric that President Putin is using does not indicate that he is cowed by any of the sanctions that he hears, and does appear to indicate that he is preparing the Russian public, his military as well, the world at large potentially, that he has potentially the intention to actually go into Ukraine, as has been long feared. This is the type of rhetoric that has been laying out. And that's just today. It's been building on previous days.
Yeah, Michael Bosterq, President Putin says the Minsk agreement, which was obviously helping to, what little it could, to keep the volatile tensions down, no longer exists, he announced. What does that mean now?
Well, President Putin never adhered to the Minsk agreement. There was very little adherence to the ceasefire provisions of it, removal of heavy weaponry. I know that. I was part of the OSCE. We observed that the Russians were not moving their heavy weaponry away from the front line. They were actually hiding it. And then also the other thing, they were actually blocking rather than giving unfettered access to the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine. Also, Allison, if I can pick up on what Aaron and Clarissa said, I'm actually just watching in front of me right now Lviv television, and they have a live poll going on asking viewers, do you think Putin will bomb Lviv, Ukraine? A quarter of respondents replied yes. So that gives you an indication of even the fear here in Western Ukraine. We're about as close as you can get as a big city to the Ukraine-Polish border. Also, the other thing I'm hearing is a lot of my Ukrainian friends in Kiev and other places to the east are actually thinking about coming this way. The city of Lviv and the Oblast is not very well prepared to take in more migrants. When the Russians invaded eastern Ukraine in 2014, 2 million plus people migrated to various parts. So there's already that kind of congestion, if you will. So a lot of anxiety. One more quick thing also about another attack on the infrastructure, ATM networks, things like that. You're seeing a little bit more activity around the banks here and other essential services too.
All right, we're more than 8 minutes past that 2-minute warning we received from the White House. So let's keep this going with General Zwack. General, to you, what does a peacekeeping mission from the Russian perspective going into the Donbass look like?
Thank you, Victor, for the question. We could go back to 2008 and look at South Ossetia and Abkhazia and Georgia as an example, and even in the events around Crimea in 2014, with in that. It gives them, if you will, in their legalistic how they try to justify it, it gives them what they see as top cover. The peacekeepers will come in. The patches now will be, it'll be white, blue, and red patches. Russians. That officially makes it invasion because they're in there because it's a peacekeeping only on the from their perspective and the two separatist regions. So you've got that. You have, and as we talk about that, they're military. And what comes in? Is it low armed? Armor and all of that. Last thing, with all of that, if it's peacekeeping, what is 120 to 150,000 troops all around, including Belarus? They haven't moved an inch. Doing it's coercion. There's sort of a threat of a sort of Damocles over the whole area if whatever they're trying to do in Donbass doesn't work.
John Harwood, back to you about President Biden's response here. We've learned that he had intelligence months ago and has been preparing for this on some level, knowing that Vladimir Putin might be interested in an invasion, might be taking steps towards an invasion. And is Capitol Hill responding the same way? Is there unity for what the U.S. response should be here?
For Washington, yes, unity. You've had supportive words, for example, from Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. It is true that Republicans and Democrats have been arguing about potential sanctions, some of which Republicans wanted to impose on Vladimir Putin before he made a move to reinvade Ukraine. The Biden administration did not want to do that because their view, which is the correct one, according to Fiona Hill, the Russia expert I talked to a couple of days ago, that you hold them back because if you impose them, you lose the deterrent effect. So that was a back and forth. They reached a stalemate. They ended up doing a resolution of condemnation of what Russia was doing. It's not particularly meaningful. But for the standards of Washington, this has been a relatively unified response, especially at the senior levels of the Republican Party. President Biden certainly is going to welcome that. This is a very, very difficult problem for President Biden. One of the things that we've seen from recent presidents, guys, is they engage in military action. Both Presidents Bush in the Gulf had military action that case of Afghanistan, resulted in a rapid victory initially. Then, of course, it got extended. In the case of the first President Bush, rapid victory, their approval ratings went way up. This is a different situation. There's not going to be an American victory on the battlefield. This is going to be a long slog in which the results are going to sting the pocketbooks of the American people, because a prolonged conflict or face-off or confrontation with sanctions against Russia is going to raise energy prices in Europe and in the United States. This is why the presidency is very difficult, because there's not a big immediate upside for President Biden here. An opportunity to show leadership, but it's not going to be quick, clean, and decisive.
All right, everyone stay with us. The start time for these remarks has bounced around throughout the day. First it was 2, then moved to 1, now back to 2, and it looks like we have a few more minutes. So everyone stay with us. We will stand by and wait for President Biden's first remarks on camera since the order of troops into the Donbas region from President Putin. Our live breaking news coverage continues.
Nurse Mariam Sabo knows a moment this pure demands a lotion this pure. New Gold Bond Pure Moisture Lotion, 24-hour hydration. No parabens, dyes, or fragrances. Gold Bond, championing your skin.
When Mom got sick, you covered for me.
You have been a mentor and my friend.
Happy 3rd work anniversary.
When companies work human, people stay through anything, because without the human, it's just work.
It's time to start.
Our full panel is back with us. I want to start with Clarissa. Clarissa, there was some dissatisfaction from the president's own party domestically to the severity of the sanctions announced yesterday. Congressman Garamendi of Foreign Affairs Committee said that it's time to stop pussyfooting around and hit Putin over the head with a 2x4. Senator Van Hollen says that the U.S. needs to do more. What was the response, or has been the response thus far, to the sanctions already announced by President Biden?
Well, I think they were seen as being largely symbolic and an important immediate reaction. But the expectation here is that absolutely more needs to happen, and more needs to happen quickly. And that's why Ukraine's leadership will be watching, as we all are, although I'm sure they already know what President Biden is going to say today. But their argument all along has been, listen, if you're so sure that this is happening, why are you waiting to levy those sanctions? Why don't you do it now? Why don't you preempt that aggression and avert a potential catastrophe? If you're so convinced that it is indeed going to be an all-out invasion, stop it from happening by levying those sanctions. But I think that no matter what sanctions are are announced today, and even if they do bite and they bite hard, the reality is that President Putin has already baked this into the costs in his mind and has already made the calculation and understands exactly what the results of those sanctions will be. And still, he appears to be committed to this trajectory. And one thing I would say, though, is while all things are pointing in a very gloomy direction, we still don't really have clarity on what President Putin's plan is yet. And that is exactly the ambiguity that he thrives on, that gray space, that sense of not knowing, that sense of everyone being on the back foot, constantly second guessing, us all spending hours endlessly speculating about what his plan is. It allows him power, and it also has allowed him over the course of the last few months to massively destabilize Ukraine without actually even launching an all-out invasion. And I think that's been another frustration I've seen a little bit from Ukraine's leadership. Don't underestimate how much damage has already been done. Don't underestimate how many billions of dollars are being removed and pulled out of this country every single month as a result of Russia's many different tactics. This is hybrid warfare 101 that President Putin practices. And Ukraine has really suffered as a result. And one other thing I'll just add, we've heard from Ukraine's foreign minister, who says again, and this is a line that they have been echoing over and over again, we are interested in peace, we will work towards peace, but that doesn't mean we will allow Russia to freely roam across Ukraine's lands. We won't allow the 2014 tragedy to happen again. The 2014 tragedy, obviously referring to the beginning of this war, the first invasion, if you would like. So that is an interesting comment in and of itself, because he is saying there is a limit to how long we will keep pushing on this diplomatic process. We favor peace, we favor diplomacy, but at some point, Ukraine could be put in a position where they will feel forced to fight back, Victor.
Mm-hmm. That leads us to Moscow, where Nick Robertson is for us. And so, Nick, if the sanctions, even the threatened sanctions, are not a deterrent for Putin, what would be at this point? And has the unity of NATO that we've seen since all these actions have emerged, has that been a surprise to the Kremlin?
I think the general view is it has been a surprise. I mean, Putin hasn't, outwardly said that. He did offer a way today, an off-ramp for everyone. He said everyone in the region could essentially sleep easier if, and of course this just isn't going to happen, but this is what President Putin said earlier today. If Ukraine decides it doesn't want to join NATO, then he says all of this is over and we no longer need to worry. That's not Ukraine's position. It's not NATO's position. And actually that belies much else that is actually said in terms of the propaganda that is building up here at the moment. This seems to be a situation where President Putin, with increasing rapidity over the past sort of 24, 36 hours, has been preparing the country for going to war. It's been an accelerated process, and it's revealed several sides of President Putin that I don't think people have been terribly aware of. He's viewed as this careful, strategic player who goes legally step by step, inch by inch. Yesterday, he appeared on television as a very angry man, absolutely bitter in his views about Ukraine, about its place in Russia, about the current leadership. There was a real sense of anger there. And when we saw him as well earlier in the day with his National Security Council, asking them all to step up to the plate, his defense chief, his intelligence chief, his foreign minister, his aide who's been involved in the negotiations with Ukraine, getting them all to sort of step up. In some cases, he dressed some of them down. Some of them looked quite nervous. This creates an impression of a very supplicant situation, a president who's been in power for 20 years, who's been frustrated, particularly for over more than a decade, with the role that NATO's playing in the region. One who seems perhaps not to engender in his staff an ability to speak up and speak their mind, truth to power. That was the impression that he created yesterday. This is a leader perhaps that we're getting to see a side of who is isolated, who is not getting good information from his key officials because they're afraid to give it, and one who's incredibly frustrated. It's a very worrying picture to see in a leader with so much power at their fingertips poised as we are at a momentous point in history.
All right, a control room, pull up the big board, please. The Dow is down about 600 points right now. Aaron Burnett, to you, there could be a significant economic impact of from what the president is about to announce, not only for companies listed there, but for individuals who are concerned about the gas prices, concerned about inflation as well.
Yes, and just obviously watching that podium as you are getting ready for the president, you're going to see it worldwide. It's a combination of the fear of what the impact could be on energy prices. Energy prices going up also adds to the already very serious inflation challenges that the United States is facing. So that drop in the market obviously significant. They are expecting an increase in both gas prices, anything linked to oil, as a result of what is happening here and as a result of further sanctions. You know, the U.S. government at this point, we haven't heard about any kind of mass sanctions on Russian oil. If they were to do that, yes, that's going to have a direct impact on the U.S. The two countries that have felt it the most thus far, Clarissa mentioning here in Ukraine, right now for that government to borrow money for a 1-year period, they have to pay about 22% interest
Aaron, the
rate.
president is walking out now to the podium, so let me interrupt you and let's listen to President Biden, his latest thoughts on Ukraine.
Well, good afternoon. Vladimir Putin recognized 2 regions of Ukraine as independent states. And he bizarrely asserted that these regions are no longer part of Ukraine and their sovereign territory. To put it simply, Russia just announced that it is carving out a big chunk of Ukraine. Last night, Putin authorized Russian forces to deploy into these regions. Today, he asserted that these regions are actually extend deeper than the 2 areas he recognized, claiming large areas currently under the jurisdiction of the Ukrainian government. He's setting up a rationale to take more territory by force, in my view. And if we listened to his speech last night, and many of you did, I know, he's setting up a rationale to go much further. This is the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, as he indicated and asked permission to be able to do from his Duma. So let's begin to, I'm going to begin to impose sanctions in response far beyond the steps we and our allies and partners implemented in 2014. And if Russia goes further with this invasion, we stand prepared to go further as with sanctions. Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belong to his neighbors? This is a flagrant violation of international law and demands a firm response from the international community. Over the last few months, we've coordinated closely with our NATO allies and partners in Europe and around the world to prepare that response. We've said all along, and I've told Putin to his face more than a month ago, that we would act together. And the moment Russia moved against Ukraine, Russia has now undeniably moved against Ukraine by declaring these independent states. So today, I'm announcing the first tranche of sanctions to impose costs on Russia in response to their actions yesterday. These have been closely coordinated with our allies and partners and will continue to escalate sanctions if Russia escalates. We're implementing full blocking sanctions on 2 large Russian financial institutions, VEB and their military bank. We're implementing comprehensive sanctions on Russia's sovereign debt. That means we've cut off Russia's government from Western financing. It can no longer raise money from the West and cannot trade in its new debt on our markets or European markets either. Starting tomorrow and continuing in the days ahead, we'll also impose sanctions on Russia's elites and their family members. They share in the corrupt gains of the Kremlin policies and should share in the pain as well. And because of Russia's actions, we've worked with Germany to ensure Nord Stream 2 will not, as I promised, will not move forward. As Russia contemplates its next move, we have our next move prepared as well. Russia will pay an even steeper price if it continues its aggression, including additional sanctions. The United States will continue to provide defensive assistance to Ukraine in the meantime, and will continue to reinforce and reassure our NATO allies. Today, in response to Russia's admission that it will not withdraw its forces from Belarus, I have authorized additional movements of U.S. forces and equipment already stationed in Europe to strengthen our Baltic allies, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Let me be clear. These are totally defensive moves on our part. We have no intention of fighting Russia. We want to send an unmistakable message, though, that the United States, together with our allies, will defend every inch of NATO territory and abide by the commitments we made to NATO. We still believe that Russia is poised to go much further in launching a massive military attack against Ukraine. Hope I'm wrong about that. Hope we're wrong about that. But Russia has only escalated its threat against the rest of Ukrainian territory, including major cities and including the capital city of Kyiv. There are still well over 150,000 Russian troops surrounding Ukraine. And as I said, Russian forces remain positioned in Belarus to attack Ukraine from the north, including warplanes and offensive missile systems. Russia's moved troops closer to Ukraine's border with Russia. Russia's naval vessels are maneuvering in the Black Sea to Ukraine's south, including amphibious assault ships, missile cruisers, and submarines. Russia's moved supplies of blood and medical equipment into position on their border. You don't need blood unless you plan on starting a war. Over the last few days, we've seen much of the playbook that Secretary Blinken laid out last week in the United Nations Security Council come to pass. A major increase in military provocations and false flag events along the line of contact in the Donbass. Dramatically staged, conveniently on-camera meeting of Putin's Security Council to grandstand for the Russian public. And now political provocation of recognizing sovereign Ukrainian territory as so-called independent republics in clear violation, again, of international law. President Putin has sought authorization from the Russian parliament to use military force outside of Russian territory. And this set the stage for further pretexts of further provocations by Russia to try to justify further military action. None of us should be fooled. None of us will be fooled. There is no justification. Further Russian assault in Ukraine remains a severe threat in the days ahead. And if Russia proceeds, it is Russia and Russia alone that bears the responsibility. As we respond, my administration is using every tool at our disposal to protect American businesses and consumers from rising prices at the pump. As I said last week, defending freedom will have cost for us as well and here at home. We need to be honest about that. But as we do this, I'm going to take robust action to make sure the pain of our sanctions is targeted at the Russian economy, not ours. We're closely monitoring energy supplies for any disruption. We're executing a plan in coordination with major oil-producing consumers and producers toward a collective investment to secure stability in global energy supplies. This will blunt gas prices. I want to limit the pain the American people are feeling at the gas pump. This is critical to me. In the last few days, I've been in constant contact with European leaders, including with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Vice President Harris met in person with the leaders in Germany over the weekend at the Munich conference, including President Zelensky. At every step, we have shown the United States and our allies and partners are working in unison, which he hasn't been counting on, Mr. Putin. We're united in our support of Ukraine. We are united in our opposition to Russian aggression. And we're united in our resolve to defend our NATO alliance. And we're united in our understanding of the urgency and seriousness of the threat Russia is making to global peace and stability. Yesterday, the world heard clearly the full extent of Vladimir Putin's twisted rewrite of history, going back more than a century, as he waxed eloquently, noting that, well, I'm not going to go into it, but nothing in Putin's lengthy remarks indicate any interest in pursuing real dialogue on European security in the year 2022. He directly attacked Ukraine's right to exist. He indirectly threatened territory formerly held by Russia, including nations that today are thriving democracies and members of NATO. He explicitly threatened war unless his extreme demands were met. And there is no question that Russia is the aggressor. So we're clear-eyed about the challenges we're facing. Nonetheless, there is still time to avert the worst-case scenario that will bring untold suffering to millions of people if they move as suggested. The United States and our allies and partners remain open to diplomacy if it is serious. When all is said and done, we're going to judge Russia by its actions, not its words. And whatever Russia does next, we're ready to respond with unity, clarity, and conviction. We'll probably have more to say about this as it moves on. I'm hoping diplomacy is still available. Thank you all very much.
All right, President Biden there announcing what he calls the first tranche of sanctions in response to Russia's actions there along the border and in Ukraine now, announcing full blocking sanctions for 2 banks there, cutting off Russia from Western financing as well. Let's bring in the full panel. We're adding Chief Political Analyst Gloria Borger to the conversation as well. But I want to go to Erin Burnett first. The sanctions that the president announced, are these severe? Are these going to be impactful?
Look, versus what we've heard from the UK and Europe, yes, absolutely they are. They're starting way higher than they started before. They took 5 months to do the first sanctions related to Crimea. So they are significant, right? Cutting off from the financial system, significant. Keep in mind, though, some of these, he's giving himself room to ramp up. The Senate, as you know, couldn't reach a sanctions bill. The bank that they had put on their list was the investment firm VEB. You heard the president mention it. Now he's sanctioned that. It is an investment bank. It leaves him room to ramp up big time to a Russian bank that, say, Russians all bank at, that would actually impact day-to-day life in Russia. Hasn't yet done that yet. So that's important to keep in mind. The sovereign debt, you know, a few years ago would have been very significant for Russia. It's important. It sends Putin a strong message. They do, though, have a huge government rainy day fund right now and a surplus. So in that sense, it's not going to immediately, you know, Putin's been preparing, as Clarissa pointed out, for this very eventuality. So we'll wait and see exactly what that list is. I don't have it yet of the oligarchs and how big and broad that is, because that's hugely important. If they get angry and upset, it could have big impact on Putin and put more pressure on him than anyone in that inner circle we saw in that room yesterday. So starting at a higher point than anywhere in Europe and higher than many may have thought, but there is a lot of runway to ramp these up.
General Zwack, what if the sanctions are not a deterrent for Putin going farther, as President Biden just predicted he would, into Ukraine? What next here?
I agree with the sanctions approach. However, there is a big basket of them out there for a scenario that a lot of analysts, a lot of people are concerned about, is if the Russians, the Kremlin, decides that Donetsk and Lugansk aren't enough, and they want the rest of the Donbass, the rest of eastern Ukraine. Now they have to conduct military operations where, if not hundreds, thousands of soldiers, Ukrainians and all that would be killed in trying to push through the Minsk Accord, if you will, line of contact that is right now dividing the Russians and the Ukrainian militaries. So that becomes a key point, and at that point, it's time to unleash. I mean, it's out. There is no. There already is no ambiguity. The relentlessness, the implacability of this, the recidivity, is mind-boggling. If the Russians come over that line of contact, thousands will be killed, and at this point, you unleash everything that we have, short of boots on the ground in Ukraine. It's that serious now.
Nick Robertson, not only the economic sanctions announced by the president, but also moving forces already in Europe to the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. How do you think this announcement lands in Moscow?
Yeah, Victor, I've just got to say, it's a very surreal situation here right now. For whatever reason, somebody not far from our office here is launching a huge barrage of fireworks here in Moscow. Heaven knows what they're celebrating at the moment. It's not that uncommon to have fireworks here, but there were certainly fireworks in the Donbass region when President Putin made his announcement last night. I think to the point of your question, though, what impact is this going to have? It's hard to see at the moment that President Putin is going to be put off of his stride. He seems very committed to the direction that is going in at the moment. Ramping up the potential and the rhetoric for further military force in Ukraine is certainly given the grounds to do that by saying that the independent areas that he has recognized are not just the bits that are controlled by the separatists, but parts of those areas are controlled by the Ukrainian government. He knew that this new round of sanctions was going to hit people close to him in his inner circle, people that it was hoped would then be pressuring him, to dial back his situation. But he does seem to be in a position, we cannot say alone, but he has put himself in a position where this is very personal, that he has committed himself to this strategy, this line that Ukraine is part of Russia. This is going to be very hard for him to walk back from, unless he hears from some very key people that are close to him. And it's not clear that those people are ready to speak up, that they're going to be sufficiently impacted. The central bank earlier today said, with the reserves at the rainy day fund that he has, that they were going to be able to support the country through economic troubles. That's the narrative here at the moment.
Michael Bosterkew, give us your assessment of what we just heard from President Biden.
Very interesting. I think it would have been nice if these had actually arrived on our inbox trays a few days or weeks ago. In terms of sanctioning the bank, since about 2018, Putin has been creating rainy day funds, slush funds, if you will, for the banks and also for Russian oligarchs. There's a $3 billion slush fund for Russian oligarchs who have been already sanctioned by the West. So I don't know how far that will hit them. For the longest time, I have been saying and writing for CNN Opinion that Russia has been deep in the process of inoculating itself against these Western sanctions. So I don't think, sadly, this will be much of a deterrent. So I think what the general said about the power available there to Putin is, yes, they will probably cross that contact line. At the moment in Donetsk, the Russian-backed thugs control the industrial heartland. Luhansk is more of a hinterland. So I think you could probably see even a push to Mariupol in the south, which is a port city. One more quick thing, if I will. In terms of the oligarchs, I think that is a very, very crucial area to fine tune. And I think Boris Johnson in the UK has been working on that. I think we have to get to a place where you are a persona non grata if you are a Russian oligarch. Whether you go to Miami, London, Vancouver, wherever, you will not be able to move funds. Your credit cards will not work. I think that's the only way this will get pressure back onto Putin to stop. But like many of the panelists have said, he's probably made up his mind. That speech last night was absolutely blood-curdling. We may be sadly in a position where there's very little deterrence left.
Gloria Borger, on the politics of this, for people who bemoaned what they believed was the abdication of American leadership on the world stage in the last administration and cheered when President Biden said America is back for that first year of his presidency, he says now this is what the cost can be, saying that defending freedom will have a cost. It comes at a time when the practical cost for a lot of people in this country is stressful.
Right. And he did say that. He didn't go into specifics. I don't think this was a speech he wanted to do that in. But he did say, look, I care that Americans don't suffer as a result of this. We have to protect our consumer, for example, from rising prices at the pump. But what really struck me was the president's tone and the president's language here. This really was the language of war, I think. He called Putin's speech a twisted rewrite of history, saying there is no doubt, no question that Russia is the aggressor. And it's very clear that the point he was trying to make today is the one thing Vladimir Putin did not expect is that American allies would work in unison. And he also made it very clear that this is the first tranche, as he said, and you've all spoken about what that contains. There is more coming. I don't think he wanted to lift the veil on that completely, but I think the seriousness of the situation was something you could see in the president's face, and you can see in his language. When he spoke about there's no justification for this, Russia bears the full responsibility, and trying to get Americans to understand about the cost of defending freedom, which has always been a theme for Joe Biden. And now here it is. Didn't take questions, walked off the stage curtly, talking to the allies. And I think we're going to see this unfold in real time in the hours to come as there are more sanctions if Putin doesn't change his mind, which nobody predicts, of course, that he will.
Yeah, I was struck by the language too. It was quintessential Biden, I thought, when he said, who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the authority to declare, this of his independent neighbors? I mean, that was, I thought, pretty Biden-esque.
Yeah.
Clarissa, how do you think the President Biden's words will be received now in Kyiv and beyond?
Well, I think in Kyiv there will be a sense of appreciation. These are robust sanctions and robust rhetoric, and that's what they want to hear. So there will be a degree